Help you?
Salami sub. Hold the mayo.
We're out of mayo.
You will have our sausages.
You know, it's very amusing to me that vegans have this reputation as being hypersensitive or easily triggered, because aside from the tremendous amount of physical and mental discipline it takes to live that way in a society where eating meat is the norm, in my experience, it's so clearly the other way around. To cite a recent example, the American president announced his intent to Congress last week to reduce the country's greenhouse gas emissions by 50% over the next decade in a speech that, despite being light on specifics and focusing primarily on job creation and economic investment, was misreported by right-wing media outlets as containing provisions which would, among other things, put a cap on your intake of red meat and force you to buy an electric car at your own expense. The headline, "How Biden's Climate Plan Could Limit You to One Burger a Month," was repeated, sans the could, by no less than 5 Fox News anchors and 2 sitting members of Congress. And before the week was out, people were posting their meat all over Twitter in protest to policy proposals which, and I cannot stress this part enough, did not exist outside of their own minds.
It's fucking demoralizing.
Okay, you want something closer to home? There was a line in my Ralph Cifaretto video, one line, where I reference Tony's dietary habits and speculate about what this might be saying regarding his character, that got more singular attention than maybe anything else I've ever said on this channel. He professes love for animals, but then he works out of a butcher shop, he buys his wife fur coats, he dumps asbestos in a lake where waterfowl are trying to make their home, he's always eating meat. Those 4 little words attracted so many comments from people determined to take the statement personally, as if I were saying you can't eat meat and love animals. And while we will talk about that, the line you all found so fucking triggering was very clearly pointing out a pattern of behavior in which Tony's actions are at odds with what he claims to think and feel when trying to elicit sympathy from people. It wasn't about the ethics of meat, okay? You goddamn snowflakes. I wasn't saying gabagool is murder. The show is saying that. Literally, the very first murder in the series takes place in the back of a butcher shop with the victim leaning over a chopping block to snort coke off of a cleaver. And look how Christopher is framed while it's happening. Then later, he's having nightmares where Emil is haunting him at Satrial's and there are human body parts mixed in with the meat in the display case. This is the beginning of a pattern in which human bodies are violently interposed in the place of animal flesh, cutting up Ralph with a meat cleaver, beating Shlomo's son-in-law with a tenderizer, wrapping Fat Dom in butcher paper.
It's gonna be a while before I eat anything from Satrial's.
It was interesting, too, because when Indira Gandhi got assassinated, I was watching a satellite feed when they broadcast the cremation. Did you know that they doused the body and the funeral pyre in clarified butter just to get it burning?
Prime rib, hamburger.
Anyway, $4 a pound.
This is something Brian Fuller's Hannibal series, which should have been continued, also pulled off to great effect with these really memorable scenes of food being prepared or served that are so beautifully shot you can't help but feel drawn to it. Even though the chef is Hannibal Lecter and you know what it's made of. It was a really underappreciated show that did a great job of making you think about life and death and where our nourishment comes from. Food is important in The Sopranos. Just like in life, it's something that preserves culture and tradition and family dynamics. Almost every major dialogue scene in the series takes place around food or a table, and Tony often eats as a way of coping with stress or to express dominance. But it's meat in particular that's always being used to comment on his psyche.
Oh, my mother would come when she looked at a pot roast.
Tony's initial panic attacks all occur while he's grilling or eating meat, and examining this in therapy eventually leads him to a series of flashbacks from his childhood, culminating when he uncovers the memory of seeing his father chop a man's finger off on the same block Christopher shoots Emil on top of in the first episode. Later that night, he sees his mother and father being sexual with each other while preparing dinner, and when he connects the trauma of the human suffering he'd witnessed with the food going into his mouth, he has his very first panic attack and faints.
That's my livelihood. So I put food on the table.
And I'd really like you to write down any thoughts or associations.
Tony punches Ralph over that quip about beef and sausage, he has an epiphany about his attraction to dark-haired, psychologically damaged women after Gloria chucks a roast at his head, and the final thing Melfi chews him out for is tearing a steak recipe from one of her magazines. Again and again, the show is using meat to paint a picture of Tony's consumptiveness and his disregard for others.
And Johnny Boy busted this place out and took it over, and old man Satriel put a bullet in his own head. There was a lot of sadness on the block.
Nothing like Christmas ham couldn't fix.
There's also this steakhouse Duke's that Tony seems connected to as a murderer. He goes there with Puss after they kill Matthew Bevilacqua, inside of a burger shack, by the way, and it's mentioned multiple times he ate there with Pussy, Ralph, and Polly the night of his first murder. Two of those people Tony eventually kills as well, and the third he almost kills in the episode where that dinner is referenced. In Season 6, Tony's gaining weight eating sushi, which he does with his fingers like the disgusting piece of shit he is, and which is also extremely difficult to do, because sushi is A, very light, and B, very expensive.
$40 for a piece of fish they just flew in first class.
We see Eugene and his family struggling while Tony buys a $3 million boat, gets Carmela a new Porsche, stuffs himself on expensive sushi until he can barely breathe, then denies one of his oldest friends the chance at a fresh start without even the courtesy of a face-to-face explanation.
I wouldn't bother him. He's out on a new boat.
There's this mural painted on the wall at Satrial's of a bunch of piglets nursing from their mother while she has a big smile on her face. All nice and happy and together, just like they're supposed to be. It's the kind of sweet little scene you might come across at a petting zoo or a small farm, but this isn't how most of the animals that provide our food are kept. The overwhelming majority of meat and dairy that makes up the American diet comes from animals that are bred and born just to be taken away from their mothers, kept in miserable, often painful conditions for their entire lives, fed garbage and pumped full of hormones with little or no consideration for their comfort or happiness because those things don't affect the company's bottom line. Federal meat inspectors are underfunded, overloaded, institutionally corrupt, and spiritually demoralized individuals with very little enforcement power over regularly unhygienic working conditions and frequent violations of the Humane Slaughter Act. You know, pigs are more intelligent than dogs or cats, and like us are highly social animals. Many Abrahamic religions have prescriptions against eating pork, and when we need to replace our own body parts, we often get the donor tissue from pigs. And by all accounts, we apparently taste quite similar as well. I'm not saying pigs are people. People may often be pigs, but that doesn't mean the life of a pig is worth as much as the life of a person, necessarily. But a dozen? 100? 1,000 pigs? How many does each American need to go through? I'm not a vegan, but I think maybe I aspire to be one now? I don't know, I tried to switch to plant-based milk a few years ago and actually developed a soy allergy. There are probably ethical ways to raise animals for meat and dairy, but I don't think we really practice them right now, certainly not collectively. Honestly, this is difficult to even talk about because in America, at least, you're working against decades of misinformation and literal propaganda that seeped into virtually every aspect of our society. I'm talking about organized, concerted efforts by private companies and by the government in misleading the public as to both the realities of factory farms and the nutritional ramifications that a high-meat diet can have on the human body. To give a common example, most of us have probably heard the myth that drinking a lot of milk gives you strong bones or teeth because it's a source of vitamin D. This is bullshit. Vitamin D does not occur naturally in cow's milk. We add that in, and the same is done for non-dairy alternatives. We also still see this image being pushed of red meat as being associated with masculinity and virility, or wealth and prestige, rather than the realities of high cholesterol, cancer, and heart disease. The Department of Agriculture spends hundreds of millions of dollars coming up with pithy slogans and graphics to convince you to buy more meat and dairy, and we give tens of billions of American tax dollars in subsidies to those same industries over those growing fruits and vegetables, despite the latter putting significantly less carbon into the atmosphere during a global crisis. And this isn't even getting into the food libel laws, which reverse traditional burden of proof in 13 American states, most of them red because, say it with me, Republicans hate free speech. Please cry like a bitch in my comments about how I shouldn't inject politics into my objective media analysis. I like meat. In my experience, most people do. I think we've evolved a taste for it because at some point it was necessary for human survival and we ate all the ones who didn't want to go along, but the truth is we don't need animal protein to live anymore. We don't even need it to function at peak capacity, so bringing things back to that question we started on, can we eat meat and still be animal lovers? Well, it's complicated. I don't think it's as simple as yes or no. What does it mean to love animals? Is it when you have a warm feeling inside while interacting with a specific animal, like Tony and Pyomai? Personally, I think our feelings only define us insofar as they influence our actions. Loving animals isn't something you are, it's something you do. So, are you loving animals while you're in the act of eating them? I guess it depends on your definition of loving steak, but my feeling is no. That doesn't mean you can't eat meat and express care for animals in other ways. I don't think any of us are really defined by any one thing. I like to think I'm an animal lover and I still eat meat, but if you're one of these little keyboard warriors running around talking shit about vegans while you slam chicken nuggets into your masticating face cunt comment bombing my video,
what do you mean you can't eat meat and love animals? I love animals and I eat meat all the time. Joe Rogan is so funny, I wish he was my dad.
Then I'm sorry to say, those aren't the actions of a person who loves animals either.
One thing you can never say, that you haven't been told.